There is a mountain in Iran. Under 80 meters of solid rock at the bottom of a tunnel dug specifically so that nothing on Earth could ever reach it, the Iranians built one of their most protected secrets. In June of 2025, the United States decided to prove them wrong. 7 stealth bombers flew for 18 hours. They dropped 14 bombs, each one weighing as much as a loaded semi-truck, onto that single mountain. It was the largest conventional bomb the United States has ever used in combat, and it had never once been fired in anger before that night. And then something strange happened. Within 48 hours, the most powerful people in the American government could not agree on what they had just done. The president said the site was obliterated, wiped from the earth, gone. His own Defense Intelligence Agency, in an assessment that leaked days later, reportedly concluded the program had been set back only months. The inspectors said the damage was enormous, but that no one could actually see inside the mountain to know. 3 authorities, 1 target, 3 answers that could not all be true. The bomb is called the GBU-57, the Massive Ordnance Penetrator, and it was built for one job, a class of target the military describes in its own flat and bloodless language as hard and deeply buried. But here is the part almost no one knows. Before this weapon was ever dropped on Iran, it was dropped again and again and again on America. For 18 years, in a stretch of desert the public is not allowed to enter, the government built fake enemy mountains and practiced destroying them. If you want more stories like this one, the hidden test sites, the buried secrets, the things governments build and then bury, subscribe. Now that phrase, hard and deeply buried, hold on to it, because it is the key to this entire story. The place this weapon was tested has a bland, forgettable, almost sleep-inducing name: the WMD National Test Beds. And it sits inside a stretch of New Mexico desert larger than some entire states, closed to the public, where the government builds targets on purpose for the specific reason of practicing how to destroy them. What they constructed out there, and what it tells you about a silent arms race happening entirely underground, is the real story. And strangely, it begins with a bomb welded together out of old artillery barrels during a single desperate month in 1991. To understand the Massive Ordnance Penetrator, you first have to understand the race it belongs to, a race almost nobody watches, because all of it happens out of sight. Every advance in weapons creates a counter-move. And when precision bombing finally became accurate enough to hit any building on the surface of the Earth, the response was as logical as it was inevitable. You go underground. You take the thing you cannot afford to lose, the command center, the reactor, the enrichment hall, and you bury it deep beneath rock and reinforced concrete in a place no ordinary bomb can follow. That single move set off a quiet, decades-long contest that most people never think about at all. On one side, nations burying their most valuable secrets ever deeper. On the other, one nation in particular, building ever heavier tools to dig those secrets back out. And the military's own name for the buried side of that race is the phrase you are going to keep hearing: hard and deeply buried targets. The modern chapter of that race began during the First Gulf War, and the story is a genuinely remarkable one. In 1991, the United States discovered that Iraq had command bunkers dug too deep for anything in the American arsenal to reach. So, in a matter of weeks, engineers improvised something extraordinary. They took surplus artillery barrels, which were heavy, dense, and already shaped rather like a spike, filled them with explosive, bolted a laser guidance kit onto the back, and produced the GBU-28. A 5,000-pound penetrator rushed from idea to battlefield in about a month. 2 of them were dropped in the final days of the war. And it worked. More importantly, it revealed the entire future of the idea. The way to reach a buried target was not a bigger explosion on the surface. It was mass and shape and speed. A heavy spike that arrives fast and burrows deep before it ever detonates. Over the following decade, the buried targets kept getting deeper and better protected, and the 5,000-pound class of weapon was no longer enough to threaten them. So in 2004, in direct response to a specific and growing fear, that of adversaries hiding entire weapons programs inside mountains, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency launched a program to build something far larger. Boeing was the builder. And the result, by the late 2000s, was the GBU-57, a weapon 6 times heavier than the improvised Gulf War bomb, a 30,000-pound penetrator that existed for one reason, and one reason only: to hold at risk the targets that had, until then, become effectively unreachable. And it is worth being honest and direct about the shadow that hung over the whole program from the very beginning. The open reporting and the program's own timing pointed at one type of target above all others: deeply buried nuclear enrichment sites, and Iran's in particular. The most discussed of these, a facility called Fordow, was reportedly built beneath roughly 80 to 90 meters of solid rock, tunneled into a mountain near the city of Qom, for the express purpose of surviving exactly this kind of attack. So understand what was really happening here. The bomb and the bunker were, in a very real sense, designed against each other, each side studying the other's capabilities and building specifically to beat them. This is not speculation. It is the widely documented context of the entire program. And none of this is secret history, which matters because it is what keeps this grounded. The improvised origin of the GBU-28, the development timeline of the MOP, the role of the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, the basic specifications of the weapon, all of it appears in Air Force releases, in congressional testimony, in defense industry reporting, and in the Air Force's own test summaries. The government's records, the trade press, and mainstream reporting all describe the same weapon and the same underground race. But a 30,000-pound bomb designed to reach a target buried under a mountain is nothing more than a theory until you prove that it works. And you cannot prove a thing like that by guessing or by modeling it on a computer and calling it done. You have to build the mountain and the bunker inside the mountain, and then you have to drop the bomb on it over and over and over again and watch exactly what happens. And there is precisely one place in America set up to do that. Almost no one is permitted to see it. That place is White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico, and this channel has stood at its edge before. White Sands is the largest military installation in the entire United States by land area, a stretch of desert bigger than some states, ringed by restricted airspace and closed to the public. It is the place where the atomic age itself began, at the Trinity test site. And it is where, decades later, the government went to solve the problem of the buried target. Inside White Sands, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency operates something with a name so dull it is almost designed to make your eyes slide off it. The WMD National Test Beds. And its function is at once extraordinary and completely simple. The government builds targets there on purpose, hardened structures, reinforced bunkers, tunnels dug down into the rock, engineered specifically to mimic the deeply buried facilities of potential adversaries. And it builds them for one reason, so that weapons can be tested against them under real conditions. It is a place whose entire reason for existing is to construct the enemy's most protected secret, at full scale, out in the American desert, and then attack it. This is where that phrase, hard and deeply buried, stops being a piece of jargon and becomes a physical thing you can drop a bomb on. Because to defeat a hard and deeply buried target, you first have to build one that you are actually allowed to destroy. So that is exactly what they did. Tunnel targets and bunker targets out at White Sands. And then they spent years dropping the Massive Ordnance Penetrator on them. The public record of that testing is clear in its outline, if not in its details. Static detonation tests began around 2007. Flight testing followed using the older B-52 bomber. The weapon was then integrated onto the B-2. And across the 2010s, the Air Force ran a whole series of test drops from B-2 bombers at White Sands. In 2012, and again in 2014, 2015, 2016. And then a set of 4 drops in 2017, validating a set of upgrades made under a program with a revealing name, Enhanced Threat Response. Each round of testing refined how the weapon behaved against the target. And each round fed a continuous cycle of modification because the buried targets themselves kept evolving, and the bomb had to evolve right along with them to keep up. Now, I want to be very clear about something here, and it is deliberate. The specific results of those tests, the exact performance figures, the precise depth and effect data, all of that is classified. And that is appropriate, and this video is not going to speculate about it, because that is exactly the kind of detail that should stay locked away. The point of this story was never the numbers. The point is the sheer existence of it. An 18-year, methodical, painstaking program to build and then destroy fake enemy bunkers out in the desert, hidden in plain sight inside a range the public cannot enter. And here is where it becomes bigger than a single bomb. Because the reason you test something for 18 years like this is that a weapon like the Massive Ordnance Penetrator is not really built to be used. It is built to be believed. Its entire strategic value is deterrence. An adversary deciding whether to bury a facility has to sit down and calculate whether the mountain above it is actually deep enough to keep them safe. And the only thing that makes that threat credible, the only thing, is a long, documented history of the weapon working against realistic targets. So those tests at White Sands were never only engineering. They were a message sent patiently for years to anyone in the world digging a tunnel. We have built the thing that reaches you, and we have proven it on your bunker's twin. For 18 years, that message stayed theoretical. The weapon was tested and upgraded and tested again, and never once used in anger. A 30,000-pound argument its makers quietly hoped would never have to become anything more than an argument. And then, on a night in June of 2025, 7 B-2 bombers lifted off from Missouri, flew for 18 hours straight, and turned that argument into an experiment. Run on a real mountain in a real country for the very first time. And what happened next is the part that no one can fully agree on, and the disagreement runs all the way to the top. Let me give you the confirmed core first, cleanly, because it is solid. On June 22, 2025, the United States carried out an operation codenamed Midnight Hammer. 7 B-2 stealth bombers flying out of Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri struck Iran's nuclear sites. 12 GBU-57 bombs hit the deeply buried enrichment plant at Fordow. 2 more struck Natanz. And Navy submarines launched Tomahawk cruise missiles at a third site, Isfahan. It was the first combat use of the Massive Ordnance Penetrator in the weapon's entire history. The moment the 18-year test program finally met a real target. All of that is not in dispute. But what that strike actually accomplished splintered almost immediately into competing accounts. And an honest telling has to hold them apart, rather than reaching for the one it likes best. The administration's position was total success. The president said the sites were obliterated, the program destroyed, set back by years. The intelligence caution came within days. A leaked preliminary assessment from the Defense Intelligence Agency reportedly concluded that the damage, while significant, had set the program back only by months. That Iran's centrifuges were largely intact. And, most importantly, that some of Iran's stockpile of highly enriched uranium had been moved out of the sites before the bombs ever fell. The White House called that assessment flat out wrong. And then the inspectors. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the world's nuclear watchdog, said the sites had suffered enormous damage. But its Director General was very careful with his words. The condition of the underground enrichment halls at Fordow, he said, could not be determined with certainty because no one could get inside to look. He also stated plainly that there had been no evidence Iran was actually building a bomb while pointing at the genuinely unresolved worry underneath all of it. Not the machines. The missing uranium. And here is the reframe that ties the whole thing together. The entire purpose of this weapon was to defeat a hard and deeply buried target. But the defining quality of a hard and deeply buried target is that after you strike it, it is still hard and still deeply buried, and you cannot see what you have done to it. The very thing that made Fordow worth a 30,000-pound bomb in the first place, its depth, its rock, its secrecy, is the exact same thing that made it impossible, from the outside, to confirm whether the bomb had truly worked. The mountain that made the target so hard to kill also made the result almost impossible to know. And that points straight at the mistake nearly everyone made in the weeks that followed, on every side of it. People treated the strike as an ending, a final verdict, obliterated or not, and then they argued furiously about which. But a buried target is never really an ending, because you cannot occupy a mountain from the air. And in the year that followed, the very thing everyone had been arguing about only grew quietly, genuinely stranger. The cameras moved on after June of 2025. The story did not stop, and where it went is the actual point of all of this. Because the strike did not settle the question, it deepened it. Over roughly February to April of 2026, a second round of American and Israeli strikes hit Iranian nuclear sites all over again, which on its own tells you a great deal about whether the first round had ended anything. The IAEA then reported that after the 28th of February, 2026, it had stopped conducting verification activities inside Iran altogether, meaning the world's inspectors had lost their eyes on the ground entirely. And as of the most recent reporting, the tunnel entrances at Fordow remain backfilled, with Iran apparently not having re-entered the site, while the location and the status of Iran's stockpile of near-weapons-grade uranium remain, in public terms, unresolved. The single most important object in this entire story, the uranium itself, is the one thing no one can currently point to and locate. Now step back and look at what all of this actually reveals, because there is a genuine lesson buried in it. The Massive Ordnance Penetrator is an astonishing piece of engineering, and by most accounts, it did serious damage. But this episode exposed the fundamental limit of even the most powerful bunker buster ever built. A bomb can collapse an entrance. It can crack a hall. It can bury a facility even deeper than it already was. What a bomb cannot do is verify. It cannot tell you whether the thing you were truly afraid of, the material, the knowledge, the intent, was even inside when you struck, or whether it had been quietly carried out a week before. Against a hard and deeply buried target, the weapon can guarantee the destruction of the place, but it cannot guarantee the destruction of the secret. And a nuclear program does not live only inside a building. It lives in stockpiles that can be moved, in centrifuges that can be rebuilt, in human expertise that cannot be bombed at all. And there is a final irony here, and I will state it fairly, without taking any political side on whether the strike was right or wrong. For 18 years, the weapon's true value was deterrence. The threat that kept the argument theoretical. But the very moment it was actually used, that particular power was, in part, spent. Because now everyone, including every other country on Earth with something worth burying, got to watch the real-world result and draw their own private conclusions. And the conclusion available to a watching adversary was not the clean and simple one, that the Americans can destroy anything they choose. It was something far more ambiguous, and therefore far more consequential. They can reach you. They can hurt you. And they can still not be entirely certain they got what they came for. And you may well be able to move the thing that matters most before they ever arrive. That is a very different lesson than the one those 18 years of desert tests were built to send. So, where did they test the bomb built to kill the bunkers that nothing could reach? In the New Mexico desert. Against mountains and tunnels they constructed on purpose for 18 years to make a threat credible. And what did the first real use of it finally prove? Not the clean obliteration that anyone wanted on either side of it, but something more sobering and more true. That you can build the single most powerful conventional weapon in human history. You can prove it 100 times over on a fake bunker in the sand. You can fly it halfway around the world and drop it perfectly, exactly on target. And you can still be left standing outside a sealed mountain, arguing about what is inside. The bomb was designed to end the era of the unreachable target. What it actually revealed is that unreachable and unknowable are not the same thing. And the second one is very, very much harder to bomb. They built a weapon to reach the one place that nothing could reach. And the deepest thing it proved is that reaching a secret and knowing for certain that you have destroyed it are two completely different problems, and only one of them has a bomb. Come back at the very end to the contradiction we started with. Obliterated, or set back months, or impossible to know. A year on, the honest answer is still the third one. And that is not a failure of reporting. It is the nature of the target itself. This whole story has been a race between burying things and reaching them. And the strange, quiet lesson of the most advanced tool in that entire race is that reaching all the way to the bottom of a mountain turned out to be the easier half of the job. The harder half was ever being sure of what you found down there. Hard and deeply buried. It is the flattest, dullest phrase in the entire military vocabulary. 3 plain words for a category of target. But sit with what it actually describes now, here at the end. It is not just a description of Fordow or of any single bunker. It is a description of the entire problem the weapon was built to solve and could never fully close. The most important things a country hides are hard to reach, and they are deeply buried, and in the end, they are hard to see even after you have reached them. The bomb answered the first 2 words. The third one is still wide open, and you do not need any special access to look into this yourself. Search the exact phrase the military uses, hard and deeply buried targets, and read the program's own public descriptions of it. Then read the competing damage assessments from June of 2025, side by side. The administrations, the leaked intelligence one, the inspectors. Notice that all 3 are describing the same 14 bombs and the same mountain. And notice that they do not agree, and that the disagreement has not closed with time. That is not really a story about one weapon. It is a lesson in how to hold a contested fact honestly. To be able to say plainly, here is what is confirmed, here is what is disputed, and here is what no one can currently know. And to resist the pull coming at you from every direction, to pretend that third category is smaller than it truly is. That same desert where they built and destroyed those practice bunkers for 18 years holds more than one buried secret. Because if a poisoned, sealed-off piece of ground, hidden in plain sight near a major American city, is the kind of story that stays with you, there is one just outside Denver that almost no one talks about. A place where the Army manufactured nerve agent, where the waste triggered earthquakes beneath the city, and which today is a wildlife refuge where bison graze over a sealed chemical tomb. That is the Rocky Mountain Arsenal,